4,500 years ago, a scribe sat beneath a ziggurat in the ancient city of Ur and pressed a reed stylus into wet clay. He was not writing a shopping list. He was not recording a land deal. He was writing something that modern scholars have struggled to explain. A description of the moon that doesn't sound like mythology at all. It sounds like a report. What he wrote, preserved on a tablet now studied by some of the world's leading Assyriologists, it describes the moon not as a light in the sky, not simply as a god floating on clouds, but as something that was placed there, something that moves with intention, something that contains within it forces, beings, and powers that govern the fate of every living soul on earth. And the strangest part? The more you dig into the verified cuneiform texts, the actual translated tablets from Ur, from Nippur, from the Yale Babylonian collection, the stranger and more compelling the picture becomes, not because of wild theories, but because of what the Sumerians themselves in their own words actually believed. This is not a story about conspiracy. This is a story about one of the oldest civilizations in human history, people who built cities while most of the world was still hunting in forests, and what they saw when they looked up at the night sky, what they recorded, what they feared, and what they worshipped, because they believed the moon was not just watching them. They believed the moon was deciding their fate. Let's go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of this story, but the beginning of everything the Sumerians understood about the cosmos. In the reed marshes of ancient Mesopotamia, in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and what is now southern Iraq, a civilization rose that would lay the foundation for nearly everything that came after. Writing, law, mathematics, astronomy, urban planning. They didn't just invent these things by accident. They invented them because they needed them. And they needed them, in large part, because of the sky. The Sumerians were obsessed with the heavens in a way that modern people find difficult to fully grasp. For them, the sky was not a backdrop. It was a message board. Every movement of every celestial body was a communication from the divine. The position of Jupiter told them about the king. The color of Mars told them about war. The behavior of Venus told them about love and destruction. And the moon told them everything else. It told them when to plant and when to harvest. It told them when to go to war and when to make peace. It told them when a king would die and when a new one would rise. But it wasn't just about reading signs in the sky. The Sumerians believed the moon was actively, consciously, deliberately involved in human life. Not as a symbol, as a participant. The god they called Nana, also known as Sin in Akkadian, the language that came after Sumerian, was one of the oldest gods in the entire Mesopotamian pantheon. The oldest cuneiform texts that mention him date to approximately 3500 BCE. That means the worship of the moon god predates the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza by over 1,000 years. Let that sink in for a moment. 1,000 years before Egypt's most famous monument was even conceived, Sumerian priests were already conducting elaborate nightly rituals dedicated to the power of the moon. And this wasn't casual worship. The temple complex at Ur, the great ziggurat that still partially stands today, was built specifically for Nana. It was the center of the city, the beating heart of Sumerian civilization. The ziggurat itself was designed to be a physical bridge between the earth and the heavens, a place where the divine and the human could meet. And at the top of that towering structure, night after night, priests watched the moon with a precision and dedication that rivals any modern observatory. What did they see? What did they write down? They wrote that Nana traveled through the night sky in a boat, not a metaphorical boat, a literal vessel. The crescent moon itself was described as the hull of a divine ship sailing through the celestial ocean above. Each night, Nana would load his boat, push off from the eastern horizon, and sail westward across the sky. The stars he passed were his retinue, his court, the divine beings that accompanied him on his nightly journey. But the journey wasn't just across the sky, it was also through the underworld. This is where Sumerian moon mythology becomes extraordinary. Every month, the moon disappears. For 3 days, the night sky is dark, the new moon period when Nana becomes invisible. The Sumerians didn't shrug this off. They had an explanation, and it was not a simple one. During those 3 Dorai, K days, Nana was believed to descend into the underworld, the Sumerian realm of the dead called Kur, to fulfill his role as a judge of the dead. He sat in the place of shadows and heard the cases of souls. He determined fates. And then, after 3 days, he rose again, reborn as the slender crescent on the western horizon. Think about what this meant to ordinary Sumerians. Every month, the god who governed time, fertility, tides, livestock, and the fate of kings literally died and came back to life. The moon's monthly cycle was not just an astronomical event. It was a cosmic drama playing out above their heads, a death and resurrection that reassured them that the universe had order, that even the most powerful divine being could descend into darkness and return. The cuneiform text known as the Descent of Nana describes this journey in detail. The moon god travels to the Kur, the great below, and during his absence, the world suffers. Cattle don't produce milk. The reeds stop growing, even the rivers slow. When he returns, life resumes. This is not vague poetry. This is a theological statement about the moon's relationship to everything alive on Earth. The Sumerians were saying that without the moon's active participation, the world stops functioning. And then there is the extraordinary text called Enlil and Ninlil, which tells the story of Nanna's birth. This is a strange and powerful myth. Enlil, the king of the gods, committed a terrible act against the grain goddess Ninlil. For this crime, the assembly of gods banished him. They sent him down to the underworld as punishment. But Ninlil was pregnant. She followed him. And here is where the story takes a turn that has fascinated scholars for over a century. The birth of Nanna was supposed to happen in the underworld. If he was born there, he would be trapped there forever, a deity imprisoned in the realm of the dead. To prevent this, Enlil made a bargain. He fathered 3 more children. 3 underworld gods who would take Nanna's place in the depths below. Substitutes who would remain so that Nanna could be free. 3 gods sacrificed so that the moon could be born in the light, could ascend to the heavens, could take his place in the sky above. The 3 substitute gods were Nergal-Meslamtia, Ninazu, and Enbululu. These are not minor figures. Nergal was the god of the underworld itself, one of the most feared powers in the entire Sumerian cosmos. Ninazu was also an underworld deity. These were beings of immense power, and they were placed in the depths of Kur so that the moon could exist in the sky. The Sumerians were saying that the moon's existence is paid for by the permanent presence of these divine forces in the underworld, that the light above is balanced by darkness below. This idea that the moon has deep, unbreakable connections to the underworld, to death, to forces that govern what happens after life ends, runs through virtually every major Sumerian text that mentions Nanna. He is not just a god of light and time. He is a god who bridges the worlds. He has 1 foot in the heavens and 1 in the abyss. His name itself is one of the most ancient divine names in human history. The Sumerian word Nanna may originally have referred only to the full moon, the blazing complete circle at the height of its power. The Akkadian name Suyin, which later became Sin, referred specifically to the crescent, the delicate sliver of returning light after the 3 dark days. These are not 2 different gods. They are 2 aspects of one being, the full glory and the trembling return, the complete power and the fragile rebirth. And this being was represented in cuneiform not by a drawing of the moon, not by any image at all, but by a number, the number 30. Because the moon governs a 30-day month, and to the Sumerians, the moon and the number 30 were the same thing. Mathematics and divinity were inseparable. The universe, they believed, was not chaotic. It was numerical. It was precise. And the moon was the most precise, most reliable, most perfectly mathematical phenomenon in the sky. This is why the Sumerians built their entire calendar around the moon. Not the sun, the moon. Their months began with the first appearance of the crescent on the western horizon. Their religious festivals were timed to lunar phases. Their astronomical observations, some of the earliest systematic astronomical records in human history, were primarily records of the moon's behavior. They tracked its rising and setting times, its angle in the sky, its color, its brightness, the halos that sometimes appeared around it, the way other planets moved in relation to it. All of this was compiled into what became one of the most remarkable documents in ancient history, the Enuma, Anu, and Lil. This is a series of approximately 70 cuneiform tablets containing somewhere between 6,500 and 7,000 individual omens. The first 22 tablets deal almost entirely with the moon. They describe what it means when the moon appears on the first day of the month, what it means when it appears late, what it means when it has a halo, when it appears red, when it is obscured by clouds, when it is visible during daylight hours. These are not superstitions. They are a carefully compiled database of correlations between lunar observations and earthly events, built over centuries of systematic sky watching by some of the most intellectually sophisticated people of the ancient world. A typical entry reads, "If the moon becomes visible on the first day, reliable speech, the land will be happy." These reports were sent directly to the Neo-Assyrian kings by their court scholars. The moon was a political instrument, a divine advisor, a cosmic early warning system. But beyond the practical, beyond the calendar and the omens and the agricultural timing, there was something deeper in the Sumerian relationship with the moon, something more personal, something almost intimate. Nanna was described repeatedly in ancient texts as a god who provides and unifies. He was called the god of living creatures and the great father of humanity. He was the father of Inanna, the goddess of love and war, who is arguably the most powerful female deity in the ancient world. He was the father of Utu, the sun god, which means that from the Sumerian perspective, the moon gives birth to the sun every day. The light of the day is the child of the night. His wife was Ningal, the great queen, a goddess of fertility and reeds. She was the lady of Ur alongside him, and the people of that city worshipped her with the same devotion they gave to Nanna. Together, they were the divine couple who watched over their city from the top of the great ziggurat, whose presence guaranteed the prosperity and safety of the civilization below. The most famous high priestess of Nana was a woman named Enheduanna, who lived around 2300 BCE. She was the daughter of Sargon of Akkad, one of the first empire builders in history, and she served as the high priestess of the moon god at Ur. What makes Enheduanna extraordinary is not just her role, it is what she left behind. She composed hymns to Inanna and to the gods of Sumer that survive to this day in cuneiform. She is considered the world's first named author, the first human being in recorded history to sign their name to a piece of writing. And she wrote for the moon's temple. She wrote in the house of Nana. This tells you something important about what the moon meant to the Sumerians. It was not just a navigational tool, not just a calendar. It was the home of divine authority, the place where the fate of humanity was decided, the source of wisdom, judgment, and cosmic order. The cuneiform text known as the Journey of Nana to Nippur describes a ritual that was reenacted every spring. Nana would load his boat with the first dairy products of the year, butter, cheese, milk, and sail from Ur northward to Nippur, the spiritual capital of Sumer, where his father Enlil waited. Along the way, the animals and plants of the marshes would greet him, the birds would call out, the fish would leap, even the trees along the riverbanks would bow as he passed. When he arrived in Nippur, Enlil would bless him and send him home with prosperity for the coming year. This was not just a poem. This ritual journey was physically reenacted by priests in boats on the rivers of Mesopotamia. The statue of Nana would be placed in an actual boat, decorated with flowers and precious objects, and carried along the waterway, while crowds gathered on the banks to witness the god's passage. The entire civilization participated in honoring the moon's journey. But the most haunting aspect of Nana's mythology, the part that still raises questions that scholars haven't fully resolved, is his role in the underworld. Not just as a visitor, not just as a judge who descends during the 3 dark days, but as something that the underworld itself has a permanent claim on. Remember the myth of his birth. 3 gods were sacrificed, sent to the underworld as permanent substitutes so that Nana could be free. The Sumerian theological implication is that the moon's freedom in the heavens is not unconditional. It is paid for. The underworld received its price, and those 3 divine beings, Nergal, Ninazu, and Belulu, remain in the depths, holding the bargain open, ensuring that the moon can continue to shine. What does this mean? It means the Sumerians believed the moon existed in a state of cosmic debt, that its light is not free, that every time you look up at the night sky and see the moon glowing above you, somewhere below, in the depths of the earth, in the realm of shadows, 3 ancient gods are fulfilling an eternal obligation so that the light can continue. And when the moon goes dark during the new moon, when Nana descends to judge the dead, the ancient Sumerian texts describe what happens in the underworld during those 3 days in language that is deeply unsettling. The dead are there, the shades of warriors, of kings, of ordinary people, what the texts call bread-eating heroes and beer drinkers, the souls of the departed who are sustained in the underworld on the offerings of the living. And Nana moves among them, hears their cases, decides their ultimate fate. This is the moon that the Sumerians worshipped. Not a rock, not a light. A divine judge who lives partially in the sky and partially in the realm of death. A god whose freedom is paid for by sacrifice. A cosmic timekeeper whose precision runs the calendar of human civilization. And a father of the sun, of love, of storms, who holds the entire divine family of the universe together. There is something in all of this that feels strangely modern. Not because the Sumerians had scientific knowledge they shouldn't have had, but because the questions they were asking about the moon are the same questions we still ask. What governs the cycles of life? What determines human fate? What is the relationship between the light we can see and the darkness we cannot? They looked up at the moon, and they built an entire theology around it, a theology that lasted for over 3,000 years, that spread from Sumer to Babylon to Assyria, that influenced the religion of ancient Arabia, and possibly the naming of Mount Sinai itself. The Babylonian moon god Sin had temples at both Ur and Haran that were still functioning in the 6th century BCE, when the Babylonian king Nabonidus, whose own mother served as high priestess of the moon, made the worship of Sin a matter of imperial policy. 3,000 years of continuous moon worship. Think about how long that is. It's roughly the distance in time between us and ancient Rome, multiplied by 3. The moon god was not a passing religious fashion. He was a fundamental pillar of Mesopotamian civilization, present at its beginning and still standing at its end. And the texts they left behind, the cuneiform tablets now housed in Yale and the British Museum, in the Penn Museum, and collections across the world, are not mythology in the sense of being made up. They are records of what people observed, what they concluded, what they believed with absolute conviction. The Enuma Anu Enlil tablets are among the most sophisticated astronomical documents from the ancient world. The hymns of Enheduanna are among the most emotionally powerful religious poetry ever written. The Sumerian myths of Nana's birth and descent are theological arguments of genuine intellectual complexity. When you look at the moon tonight, if you step outside and look up, you are looking at the same object those scribes looked at in Ur 4,500 years ago. They pressed their observations into clay, and those tablets survived wars, floods, the collapse of empires, the conquest of their civilization, 2,000 years of burial in the dust of southern Iraq. And now we can read them. They tell us the moon was Nana, that it sailed through the night on a divine barge, that it descended into the underworld every month to judge the dead, that its freedom was purchased with the eternal imprisonment of 3 gods in the darkness below, that it governed time and fate and fertility and death, that it was the father of the sun and the grandfather of love, that it watched over the city of Ur from the top of a stepped pyramid while priests below conducted rituals and musicians played and the first named author in human history wrote poems in its honor. That is what the Sumerians believed about the moon. That is what the tablets say. Not a hollow vessel with hidden inhabitants in the science fiction sense, but something almost more extraordinary. A conscious, living, morally responsible divine presence that participated directly in the running of the universe. A god who died every month and came back, a judge who knew the names of every human soul, a sailor on a celestial sea whose cargo was the fate of the world. The ancient scribes of Ur didn't look up at the night sky and see an empty rock reflecting sunlight. They saw a being with intention, with power, with a history more dramatic than any story ever told. They saw a god who had earned his place in the heavens through sacrifice, who carried the weight of the dead even as he lit the path for the living, who returned every month, reliably, precisely, mathematically, to prove that the universe had order and that they were not alone in it. Maybe that's the most human thing of all. Not the supernatural elements, not the divine cosmology, but the desire, the deep and burning need, to look at the moon and feel that it is looking back. 4,500 years later, you're still doing it. And somewhere in the clay libraries of ancient Ur, a scribe who never thought anyone would read his words again pressed his reed into wet clay and wrote, "The moon is watching. The moon decides. The moon will return." He wasn't wrong about the last part.